So we want to begin by acknowledging the Gabrielino Tongva and Chumash people as the traditional land takers of sorry if I can speak, I got a cold, of South Los Angeles. We pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and to our relatives, past, present, and emerging. So grateful to have this space and acknowledge that those are the shoulders that we stand on. So welcome. Welcome to, I believe, what is our third, Gloria, am I right, our third annual now Changemakers Summit. Tonight our theme is Maintaining the Spark, committing to social justice through various career and life stages. And want to begin also by thanking our presenting partner, UCLA Health. Thank you. UCLA Health thanks you. So systematic racism, I think we would all agree, is not a new phenomenon, but 2020 catalyzed a global conversation on racial injustices. Many companies, organizations reacted with statements and renewed statements of support and promises to change the way in which we operate. And as a result, many workplaces have created, developed, and or revamped their statements on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And being Bruins, passionately optimistic that we are, continue to be leaders in the diversity space, equity, and inclusion by applying our world-class, #1 ranked education to create knowledge, innovate best practices, and activate change. Again, that's what Bruins do. For Bruins, it's not just a moment, it's been our movement. Again, that's because Bruins do, and that's again why we're gathered in this space tonight. Thank you for sharing, Alberta. Our annual Changemaker events are our rededication to this spirit, ensuring the ripple effects of our efforts that they will continue for generations to come. And through this year's theme, we acknowledge and celebrate that engaging as social actors in change efforts is a marathon. It's a sprint. Complex opportunities and challenges arise as we navigate our passion and patience for social justice in light of our different career paths, our leadership roles, and our life stages. Learning with and from one another is critical for ensuring that we continue this journey with clarity and with support. And it's critical that we highlight the work of our alumni in the communities throughout LA and beyond. To honor this, we sought to host this year's Changemaker Summit in this space in the community of South LA at the Community Coalition. We hope to continue taking this event on the road, and we welcome your feedback, your ideas, for topics for us to cover, whether it's tomorrow or throughout those generations that we talked about. So let's get started. Before we do, I do want to acknowledge our alumni staff who are in the house, who partnered with our partners here to make this event happen. So if you could stand, we could acknowledge you. Thank you. So now it's my privilege and honor to pass this off to a leader within our community, the Deputy Mayor of Community Safety for the City of Los Angeles, Karen Lane. Welcome, Karen. Karen, you have fans in the house.
So good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm honored to be a part of an event that recognizes the contributions of 3 Bruins that are very special to my heart, but that has also helped transform this city and this state. I'm also overjoyed to see a UCLA Alumni event in South Central Los Angeles. This neighborhood and this physical space helped shape my leadership, similar to the halls of Kirkhoff and of Old Men's Gym that house student-led efforts around retention and outreach. As a student, there were alumni that mentored me and would say that UCLA was a microcosm of Los Angeles. In fact, we as students practiced building the Los Angeles we wanted to see, the future that we wanted to see. At UCLA, we experimented in building an inclusive democracy by building a multiracial coalition that organized political power of students to win students' elections. We fought for making public systems accountable by fighting for access to higher education, not for ourselves, but for youth of color and youth from poor and working communities. As Bruins, we understood that the innovation and excellence of the university should benefit all communities. So we learned how to find and create opportunities to use our education and access to the university to serve our communities through student-led community service projects. Much of that work led us to Community Coalition, even as students. Today, we acknowledge 3 Bruins, but we are actually one of many Bruins that came through the doors of Community Coalition. We were certainly received professional training as organizers, and many of us worked and had the opportunity to be trained by the now mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass. Yes. But all of us were developed by the very residents in this neighborhood. The leaders and grandparents fighting reforms to the child welfare system. The leaders that fought for access to food and held grocery stores accountable for selling sour meat to residents here in Los Angeles and South L.A., for shutting their doors after making promises to provide more quality services here in South L.A. The story of the coalition is tied to the 1992 civil unrest. And we tell the story of the campaign to stop the rebuilding of liquor stores. The founding staff of this organization will tell you that the staff went out into these very neighborhoods to ask the question, what would make your neighborhood safer? They all assumed that they would say, getting rid of crack houses. That's the problem in our community. But the residents said, no, it's the liquor stores. The liquor stores are the epicenter for crime and harm in our community. It's important, yes, the campaign was successful in changing the built environment of Los Angeles, but more important, it elevated the point of having an accountable government, a government that was accountable to all communities and residents. The problems of the liquor stores are really the problems of the system, of planning and development. The quality of the equity was not the same. You could plan and develop differently here in South Central Los Angeles. So yes, it was about making sure liquor stores were operating at a certain level, but it was also challenging the idea that the city of Los Angeles had to be accountable to the residents of Los Angeles and South Los Angeles, and residents here had a right to say what went into their neighborhood. So again, the campaign improved the built environment, but it also led to a citywide nuisance abatement ordinance that benefited residents throughout every community in Los Angeles. So we tell that story not because we're trapped in the past, but because it exemplifies the idea that those who are closest to the harm know the solutions, and that those solutions can lead to transformative change and build equitable systems. The same could be said for successful campaigns to win equity in school funding, decrease suspension rates in LAUSD schools. These are COCO campaigns led by COCO members, the residents and youth of South Central Los Angeles. Community Coalition is a pipeline for leadership development. Research shows when people are politicized as youth, they remain active politically as adults. Those same young people also increase civic participation in their families and in their neighborhoods. That research was based on Community Coalition, the organization's youth program. Young people who were politicized here are leading nonprofits. Some of them are here now. They are leaders in their field, leader in elected offices, and even those who are in private industries remain politically active. Community Coalition is at the forefront to work to build an inclusive, equitable democracy. Every year, this organization engages and activates tens of thousands of residents to become politically engaged in the political decisions that impact their community. COCO continues to push Los Angeles to be better. Right now, this city, and there's forces in this city that says that Black and Latino residents should be fighting over power. But Community Coalition and its members continue to push against that narrative. That instead it's about organizing Black and Latino political power to fight for transformative change. Right now there's a national discourse about what makes us safer, still asking that question. There's a national discourse on policing. COCO continues to push for alternatives to arrest and incarceration. And I have no doubt that South Central Los Angeles will once again build a model, a national model, that will ensure that mental health professionals respond to mental health crises, that housing professionals respond to the unhoused, a model that will benefit not only residents in South Central Los Angeles, but across this city, across this state, and across this nation. Community Coalition is a center for activism for everyday people fighting for the Los Angeles that they want to see, fighting for the future that they want to see. So I wasn't asked to talk about the three panelists, and I'm happy I wasn't because I don't know if I could do that without fighting tears. But what I will say is Area, a mentor to me, is the example of homegrown leadership right here in South Central Los Angeles. She has poured herself in building the infrastructure of Community Coalition. And by infrastructure, yes, I mean the systems, the standard. One of the standards that I still can use is that we can never be young and scrappy, that we have to have a standard of professionalism as an organization. But infrastructure also means people. Area has poured herself into countless activists that have come through these doors, young people and adults, and helped shape their leadership, and again, raise their own personal standards around leadership. Alberto's strategic leadership has elevated the voices and experiences of Black and Latino residents in South Central Los Angeles and policy discussions at the local, state, and national level because of his ability to build coalitions and to always create space for everyday residents to be part of that debate. And Ryan was one of my freshman brigade when I was the chair of the African Student Union at UCLA. And he continues to demonstrate humble leadership in a way that creates connectedness and brings people into the conversation and creates opportunities for people to participate. So I'm happy that UCLA has made it to the corner of 81st and Vermont. It's a special place for me. It's a special place for this city. And I'm just excited about the future of the Alumni Association, but I'm also excited about the present and future of Community Coalition. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Let's give it up for the Deputy Mayor, Lane, please. Thank you. Thank you all for coming to Community Coalition. I'm Alberto Retana. I am the President and CEO here and a Bruin alum, like all of you. So yes, yes, yes. Before I jump in, I wanted to just take a moment and do some acknowledgments for tonight. Thank you to UCLA Health for pulling this together, the alumni for pulling this together, Julie Sign Up for making this happen. I know that this is a non-traditional approach, but in this period, it's the non-traditional approaches that bring about the greatest changes in our world. So just wanted to acknowledge you. Wanted to take a moment, because you mentioned the study, Dr. Veronica Terriquez is the doctor who led that study that showed that young people that get involved on the front end are folks that get involved later. She's the head of the Department of Chicano Studies over at UCLA. So just a shout out to Director Veronica Terriquez. Yes. And I do want to acknowledge, and in a moment I'm going to be a bit disruptive and have Denise come up in a second, but Denise Pacheco for pulling this together and bringing us south to the 10 freeway. So thank you so much for your leadership on this. And last but not least, one person special, dear to my heart, is my brother. It was interesting when we met, Paco Ratana. Where are you at, Paco? There he is. Paco's the president-elect of the UCLA Alumni. Woohoo! We were in a meeting the other day, we were introducing, and someone was like, oh, cool, you're head of Latino alumni. I was like, nah, dude, we're in charge of the whole thing, yo. Like, what's up? Let's go, collectively in charge. But I thought it was an important symbol of reaction, like oftentimes amongst our people, we're like, oh, cool, like we're in charge of our own group. And that's important nonetheless. But I just think it's incredibly important to have a Latino leader in charge of the UCLA Alumni Association Board of Directors. And so thank you so much. Next year, when you step into that. So I certainly wouldn't be standing up here today had it not been for my brother. So more on that in a little bit. Let me start by grounding my remarks a little bit in how I think about change making, since it is the theme of the evening. And it's interesting, I got a bunch of questions, and like 2/3 of the questions are about me. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to flex. I'm going to talk about me. That's not something I'm used to doing. I'm used to talking about everything else, but I'm going to flex. I'm going to do it and use the conversation a little bit later to really delve into the theme of tonight. But I remember a couple of years ago, I gave my brother a hard time because UCLA was hosting a Changemaker event. And I flipped through the program. Well, I didn't flip it. It was online. I scrolled through the program. And I saw a remarkable list of speakers, of disruptors in many fields, doing great work. And there was a deep commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion being centered at this summit, which I think is incredibly important, incredibly important. But I gave him a hard time because I felt like DEI is what corporations do. Social justice and social change is what community leaders do. And what was weighing on me at the time was that on the onset of COVID, the racial reckoning, the BLM protests, the loss of life, I was a bit shocked to see that some change makers were not on the menu. Because change making, the most fundamental kind, that which challenges society to transform itself. Not just the institutions within societies, not just the universities within societies, not just the nonprofits or the corporations, but society itself to turn around on its head, required the kind of change makers that are about transformation. The kind of change that forces fundamental change once in a generation. And that kind of change is about power. So I was like, how can we get to a conversation about power? I know it's a huge step, but how do we get there? And my brother, the great listener that he is, took it in and was like, you know what? Like, it's a really, really good point. But he didn't just leave it. He didn't just leave it. I know it was really important. I talked to Denise about this. I was like, the cool thing to do would be have my brother come up here, but I'm so anti-nepotism, and I'm so good about keeping our life private. But I just want to acknowledge, I don't think this were to happen had you not stepped in and listened. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said it best. Power, properly understood, is the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, or economic changes. In this sense, power is not only desirable, but necessary in order to implement the demands of love and justice. And there's so much about this quote that I love, but at least for tonight that I want to remind folks is the ability to achieve purpose. Tonight is very important to me because UCLA has broken the historical practice of most universities that study south of the 10 freeway or own property south of the 10 freeway, but just stay on their property. No, not going to mention any schools here. But really build relationships with the people in it. Today's a big day because UCLA has come south of the 10 freeway to shine a light on our purpose. And that couldn't have happened without Denise. And Denise, I just wanted to bring you up. I know I'm supposed to be speaking, but if you don't mind just coming up and sharing a little bit about why this matters, why this is important, why you took the charge, because the kind of courage and leadership, and I'm not saying courage and leadership in the face of resistance, because the UCLA leadership, I think, with open arms accepted Denise's idea, but it takes a person to push, whether it's in the school or on your neighborhood or at the child care center or in the Department of Child and Family Services or in dependency court, you name it. It takes one person to start pushing, and I just want to acknowledge that for Denise, and just to come on up for a second and say a little bit about why.
Hi, good evening. I appreciate you challenging me, Alberto, because it's not, as I hear you often say, it's not about me, it's not about us, it's about the community, it's about the people, it's about the families, it's about the children who deserve more, who deserve better. And so I do want to honor that this happened because of my conversations with Baco. This happened because of my conversations with Corey Rosas on my team, who uplifted your powerful piece and your acceptance speech last year when you received the UCLA Alumni Award for Community Service. This is because Julie said you can take it to the community, and I didn't blink an eye and said, we need to go to the community. When I walked into Community Coalition, this is one of the few places and moments, I would say, where I felt at home, where I feel comfortable. I actually want to come here. And I'm curious about why more people did not join us today. I'm curious if people are afraid of what they don't know and don't understand. But I'm also proud because I do have faith that the people who are meant to be here tonight are here tonight. The people who need to hear this message and need to hear from you, they need to hear from Aurea, they needed to hear from Karen, they need to hear from Ryan, they will hear tonight, and the words will fall on good soil. So I have faith in that. I was meditating on my way here and thinking, we stand on the shoulders of giants. The youth are looking to us to be those ancestors to be. One of my friends calls us baby elders. We are elders in the making. And so I embrace that and say, it's time, the time is now. There are too many people without homes, without clean water, without dignifying education, all the things that Karen just uplifted. The time is now. And Dr. King also reminded us the time is always right to do what is right. And I am sitting with, what are we doing? What are we doing about 40,000 people who have homes? They do have homes, but they don't have a house over their head. What do they do when it rains? What are our children doing not learning their history? And I'm here because my grandmother marched with Cesar Chavez. I'm here because my tias fought against what was happening in South America, and I honor that I stand on their shoulders, and I want us to receive the wisdom and insight that it is about you and it's not about you at the same time. So I am honored that you will speak, and I'm very honored that Aurea and Ryan will speak with us today.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for that. You mentioned, I think we have a great crowd tonight. I maybe in your mind you were thinking we were going to have people flooding into the streets, right? Of course. But I want to say this to that point. I'm an organizer, so I've been in rooms with 2 people, and I've been in rooms with thousands of people. When you had 2 people when you were planning on 100, and 1,000 people when you were planning on 300, right? But I always try to think through about the folks that met in secret, in basements, handfuls of folks, white and black, or brown and brown, or brown and black, just in secret, just to build out strategies to survive, to build strategies to change. Those were sanctuaries. Those were church basements. And I'm honored that we don't have to be in a basement, but I do believe we're at the sanctuary of 81st in Vermont, a community coalition, and we're under our tent, and we're going to start here. We're going to keep on building, right? Okay, a little bit about me, or my lineage, really. The specifics of my journey may resonate with some of you. It may not resonate with others. But I hope that the story of reclaiming who I am does. As we all at some point in our lives have to reclaim who we are. We have to lay purpose on why we live, on why we breathe, why we manifest change for ourselves. My parents are immigrants. They came in the late 50s and early 60s. I used to always say the early 60s, and then I did that 23andMe, and I learned my mom actually got in the 50s at some point. We're going to have to figure that out. What was she doing here, dude? Allegedly, she was, doing something else, so I don't know. My father's from Costa Rica. My mother's from Mexico. My father's family, a little bit about his family, was always civically involved. My great-grandfather founded a canton in San Jose, which is like a county. So he got people together, and they founded the county, the first sort of county there. They had on a block, they owned a building, and on the bottom floor was my grandfather's upholstery shop. And on the second floor, they had a club, and they would hold, music, like they were getting down. And so I always wondered where my dad learned music, and it was when he was a kid, probably working the bar. I always wondered where he learned how to play pool, because he was a professional pool player in Costa Rica, because he was probably illegally playing at the bar. And I always wanted to know where my brother learned to dance so well, and now I know he was illegally at the bar as well. They really helped the community a lot. They were very involved, like a civic family would be. They really were beloved. I didn't really know how beloved they were, and it's kind of ironic because my mother's house burned down about, 2 months ago. But My grandmother's house burned down in the 60s. The entire neighborhood helped to pitch in. There was a flyer that my brother just sent me of a fundraiser that they held, but people came and donated materials, and people actually helped rebuild the house that my grandfather lived in back then. In the late 40s and early 50s, after Costa Rica had made a series of significant social reforms, they made healthcare a right, they made education a right, they made Social Security a right, they disbanded the military, right? Said, we're not going to have any military, we're going to get rid of it. After they made a series of social reforms, it was a counter-revolution to upend all those progress. My father joined the forces to defend his country, so there's pictures of him holding a water shooter. No, it's like it's actually a specific weapon, American weapon, to defend what he believed in. My mother's parents were special too. My grandfather was an indigenous man who worked as a cook on boats and hotels. My grandmother made tortillas as a living, and my grandfather apparently worked on boats for many years unpaid. So kind of like indentured servitude, so he got to live on the boat, but he cooked. And there was an attorney that filed a civil suit on his behalf and a bunch of other folks that were working the boats, and won, and as a result was given land in Tijuana, a block. He was given a block. And on that block, he built homes for my family. So my family had homes that he was able to win because of the suit. And I always remember, just try to think about where I'm fortunate that we had that level of stability in my life, but that stability came at a price, right? Decades of exploitation and some luck that a lawyer stepped in to have his back. My grandmother, this is a bit of a trigger, so just a warning. But my mother, as a young child, was raped by her stepfather, and she birthed that son. He's my uncle, who was with us. He was certainly, I think, my brother's favorite uncle. But she took matters into her own hand to bring about justice, and I'll just leave it at that. I tell this story more so to think about how our families are steeped in resistance. I'd like to believe that it's in my DNA, yet I did not know it until arriving later as a student at UCLA. I think all of us should take a moment to think about our grandmothers, our great-grandparents, those of us that have the opportunity to know that. Some of us don't even have that luxury of knowing, but for those of us that do, just to remember that your story is really rooted in those who came before you, and that they laid the groundwork for you to be where we are today. Prior to UCLA, my brother was very worried about me. In middle school, I had terrible grades, C's and D's. I had U's, I had terrible behavior. I was always causing a muck. Every teacher was moving me around. I was the kid they talked about during lunch, in the teacher's room. And I was kind of a smart, Unlike my brother, though, I grew up in Orange County, so my parents, which was a deeply conservative and racist community at that time, so the 80s and 90s, and my parents and many Latino families and children were regularly called wetbacks and beaners and made fun of. They would come to my dad's upholstery shop and talk a lot of smack. I remember one time my mom came to the middle school to point out the kids that were talking. I was so embarrassed. I was like, why are you here? Leave school. Why are you pointing at you're making life hard for me? But really, she was planting a seed about what I would be doing later with my son in middle school. My brother started talking to me about race because he was nervous. I went to Orange County. It was like 70% of students in my school were white, and it wasn't like Eagle Rock white or Echo Park white. It was Orange County white folks. They were some of you, love you, but were giving me a hard time. And he was really nervous, so he started making me read articles on assimilation and acculturation. I know what the hell those words were. I was 12. But what I did know was that he wanted me to be proud of my people and of my culture. So the seeds were planted in the soil that my parents and ancestors harvested, but the plant had yet to grow. UCLA was my greenhouse. Let's talk a little bit about UCLA. I was a freshman in 1993. I was a proud beneficiary of affirmative action. I don't know how I would have been admitted without it, to be totally honest with you. And I am so amazed when I hear about our folks getting in, like Aurea's daughter, who's going to be going to UCLA in the fall. Sorry, I kind of probably, that was going to be your, I arrived 1 year after the Chicano Studies hunger strike. That April, Cesar Chavez passed away, and there was a huge procession honoring his legacy. Now, I grew up in Orange County, so I'm going to be honest with you. I was like, the boxer died? What the fuck? What the hell? Because thanks, Paco, for not teaching me about Cesar Chavez. But that's because the schools I went to didn't talk about Cesar Chavez. They just didn't. That was the last thing. We knew about boxers, but not social justice advocates. So I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. UCLA was a campus with students committed to social justice. But as with many students of color, I was working to find my way. I had a dream of getting into the theater department. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do theater. I wanted to study performance while preparing myself for law school. I was like, I'm going to do theater, I'm going to do performance, and maybe I can be an attorney at MALDEF at the same time. But there was a major, major disruption to the plan, and it started with my classes. I was taking on the History of Latin America by Dr. E. Bradford Burns, which was a major history professor at UCLA that Reagan called out in the 80s. I was learning political theory from Dr. Victor Wolfenstein, and these classes were absolutely blowing my mind. At the end of my freshman year, I read a news article about a march in downtown LA for immigrant rights. There was a beautiful mosaic of people demanding justice and respect along Broadway. There was a law brewing to deny services to undocumented immigrants, and blame was assigned to my people for crime, for taxes, and for the fall of US superiority. It was at that moment I felt the need to get involved, so I joined with other student activists, and Karen talked about this in her opening. We formed coalitions, Black, Latino, API, Indigenous folks. We waged campaigns in defense of affirmative action. We took over buildings in student government. We tried to shut down Carnicel's inauguration. Sorry. But we did because we were on the brink of seeing a 75% drop of Black students, of which happened. We called on the UCL administration to keep the doors of the university open, especially Black and Indigenous people. We called on brown folks to stand on solidarity with Black folks. And we called on all folks to stand in solidarity with Indigenous folks who couldn't even show up to the protest because they were just trying to survive making it to graduation day. I remember the first big march I helped to organize. About 5,000 students stopped traffic on Westwood in Wilshire. My brother came. He looked worried and proud. He asked me if I was going to get arrested. I told him no. I remember being arrested that day, though. I felt proud to not accept attacks in our community. It was a monumental moment for me. I went on to get arrested a few more times, but more importantly than getting arrested was finding my purpose, which was to fight for inclusion, to fight for justice, to stand for our communities, to work with everyday people to make things right, to not just stand up for my own, but to stand up for other people. That wasn't enough to be a narrow nationalist. It wasn't enough to just fight for Chicanos. Like, it just wasn't my thing. It had to be for everybody. So what were we doing to bring Black folks along? What were we bringing to stand up against patriarchy? Queer politics was very different back then than today. So what did it mean to stand up for queer politics back then? These were all kind of choices that were monumental and important at the time for me. So my journey at UCLA was protest, and for others, it could be the subject matter, it could be mentorship, it could be your family, it could be community, whatever it is, it's important to never forget the genesis, especially when it's rooted in good, rooted in change, rooted in justice. I arrived here in 1998. I was dropped off at my friend's house a few blocks away, and they walked me over to the interview. I wasn't wearing a tie. She gave me her brother's clip-on tie. You gotta wear a tie. If you're gonna come to the hood, you can't be showing up looking like young and scrappy. Though it wasn't Aurea that shared that, it was someone else. And ready to do more. The Community Coalition was special to me. It was special to me because it was building unity between African Americans and Latinos. But it didn't stop there. It was building unity between elders and youth, between renters and homeowners, unity between zip codes and neighborhoods, unity between schools, So when we do youth organizing, and we'd always chime them up, like who's better, Manual or Fremont, to get them going. But at the end of the day, it was about all of our schools not being left behind. It's also where I learned, here's where I learned that protest was just but one tactic in a larger toolbox for power building. I'll close out by saying this before bringing our people up, because I can share maybe some of the examples of our work. But it's been over 20 years since being here, and I'm still so grateful to have purpose at Cocoa. I mean, this is my jam. This is my jam. I'm glad I found my jam. I'm scared. Like, what next? I don't know what my jam is. I'm not going to work for the mayor. That's what our people can do. But, Cocoa is not my forever job, right? And so as we talk about careers, tonight is very meaningful to me. I think it's an opportunity for all of us to be reflect on that. And one of the things I'm going to ask Ryan and Aurea to talk about is this deep reflection. Hopefully we can share a conversation around reflection on purpose. As with many of you, certainly with all that has happened in the world around us, I do wonder what I can do to continue to push the envelope and make sure we don't go back to pre-COVID, right? We're not going to go be that normal again. You said it. There's 40,000 people on the streets every night. 4 or 5 people die daily. 30% of those folks on the streets are black. 8% of our population. The fastest growing homeless population are Latinos. Black and brown folks are filling up the streets without a roof over our head faster than we're getting into the university, faster than we're graduating. What can we do about that? The numbers are paralyzing, and the problem seems unsurmountable. But I do fundamentally believe that no problem is ever too big for us, just like no task is ever too small. That sounds like a cartoon. It is a cartoon. Paw Patrol, I think. Gosh. I was asked to talk about our careers, so I'll just say this. One will be very bold, and one will be even bolder. The first one is, if your gut is telling you to do more, then do more. Do it. If your gut is telling you that your job is not satisfying you, leave it. Leave it. If we have a privilege of carrying a UCLA degree, some of us have multiple degrees. So if you're doing something that's not satisfying you, I'm Jerry Maguireing it. Get out, grab that goldfish, and walk out. Do what's meaningful to you, because this moment ain't coming back. Whether you're 25 or 23 or a recent graduate or in the middle of your career or at the end of it, if it is not hitting you in your heart the way you need to be hit because you care about what's going on, move on. Take the plunge. Be courageous. And have a community of people help you. That's the bold option. Here's the even bolder option. This is going to be counterintuitive. But for many of you, that may not be a real option, right? You got families, you got kids, you got retirement you're thinking about, like, oh man, I got this. There's lots of things that could be a reason not to do it. But I just want to remind you that there is no task that is too small. You don't have to change your career or become a president of this or a leader of that. Leadership, in its most noble form, is not about credit. It's not about your title. It's not about you in front of a camera. It's about contribution. It's not about credit. It's about contribution. So join a volunteer organization. Join Community Coalition. Come set up tables and chairs. Serve food. Call others to get involved. Come to a session on organizing. Tutor a youth. Come south of the 10 freeway. If you're not ready to change your career, come and set up some chairs. Because what you're setting up is the process by which others are going to get engaged in the revolution action of bringing about change for your community. And that's one of the things that the civil rights movement taught us, that Reverend Loss has taught us about servant leadership, that the Marian Wright Edelman talks about, servant leadership. It's not about the titles, but come and set up some chairs and get out the way so that somebody else can do it. So you don't have to. But you know why that's bolder? Because more often than not, people choose to not do that. We stay okay with our careers and we don't move on and do that next step. But it starts with you taking on the next step. And before you know it, you might be pushing a major campaign because it started with setting out a chair. The one piece of advice I have for everyone beginning their career in the middle or towards the end is build a kitchen cabinet to help you with these decisions. Elected officials have kitchen cabinets. You got to have kitchen cabinets. Don't invite enemies into your cabinet, right? You don't need enemies in your cabinet. That's not a good idea. But if you bring everybody who agrees with you to it, that's also not a good idea. You got to bring a diversity of opinion that's going to push you, challenge you. For those of you that don't have partners yet, find someone who's going to fight you. That's what I did, and it's working out just right. Power properly understood is the ability to achieve purpose. What will it take for all of us to achieve purpose? What strength is required to turn LA around? I know you all share in the struggle to advance the demands of love and justice. I know you do. If you didn't, you wouldn't be here. And regardless of where you are on your path, as hard as it may be in your darkest hour, together in these conversations, we find our purpose. And there's nothing more purposeful than finding purpose under the light with others than to be stuck by yourself in your darkest hour, not knowing what to do. Thank you all so much for allowing me to share some thoughts tonight. I am going to hand it back. Okay, no, I'm going to bring on up our people. So we're going to bring up Aurea Montes Rodriguez and Dr. Ryan Smith up to the stage. Is this off? Oh, here we go. You all should have a microphone. Okay. Cool. All right. So let's start by pretending that I actually own these things at my house. And we're actually chilling in my living room after a long day's work, and no one's hanging out with us. And we're just reflecting, and it's like, man, like, we've been at Coco for 20-some years. Like, you've been at this for 20-some years. You just got to Coco, right? Like a little over a year ago. Woo, right? Like, man, like, why do we do what we do? Why do we keep doing it? So let's start with that. Like, Ryan, why don't you start us off? What brought you here? Why are we doing this?
All right, first, I just want to say, go Bruins! I'm so honored to be doing this. To have UCLA at Community Coalition feels like a powerful, like, full circle moment in my life. And you talk a lot about reflection. So while you and Karen and other folks were speaking, I do have to say this. Like, I would not be here if it wasn't for the impact of UCLA, but I wouldn't be out here without leadership, to your point. A couple ways. One, in my journey, I just want to let you know, Aurea Montes Rodriguez was my first boss. My first job, we were talking about youth being engaged. My first job happened not far from here. I was chosen in a youth fellowship that was started by the Malcolm X grassroots movement and Youth United for Community Action. I actually applied for the job off of 92.3 The Beat. You remember 92.3 The Beat? And shout out to Dominique DePrima for holding it down still on the ones and twos here in the community. And she said, hey, if you're a youth and you're engaged and you're excited, there's this youth fellowship. And I applied and got the job. I was 15 years old. First job I've ever gotten. And the first day I came and said, okay, now you're gonna go organize youth. And I got so excited and I was like, all right, well, what does organizing youth mean? What do you mean by that? But I met Aurea Montes Rodriguez, who was a first year at UCLA that day. And she mentored me and other youth. We talked about politicizing youth. They were a fundamental part of my leadership development. I will say right now, I would not be on this couch if folks like Aurea, and specifically Aurea, did not invest in me, so thank you. Aurea, publicly, thank you for all that you've done. And I know I look older than you, but I appreciate that you mentored me as a youth. And I'll also say this, Karen Lane spoke words about what happened at UCLA. She was my African Student Union chair. She ended up becoming the president of UCLA. Now, the thing about Karen, you may not have saw this, but she's not the tallest person in the world. But Karen stood 7 feet tall at UCLA. She championed black students. She told the chancellor what was what. She made sure that we developed a community, but she spoke truth to power every day. There's oftentimes in my leadership that I think about what Karen did for black students, for brown students, for indigenous students, and I appreciate your leadership, and I just want to say this. Congratulations, Deputy Mayor Karen Lane, well deserved for your years of holding us down and your years of commitment for us as well. And then lastly, you know, we were a little bit of a generation apart. As you had mentioned, you fought against Proposition 209, you fought against 187. But when I got to campus, my fall of 1999, everyone knew the legacy of Alberto Retana. Everyone knew of the work that you did to ensure that folks like me could go. And even though I was one of 27 black men that year in a class of 4,000 freshmen, you all said continue to fight no matter what. And I just want to know, your legacy loomed large, and there's a lot of pictures of you. You're just a photogenic guy. So there are a lot of pictures on the campus, but what you were able to do for folks that look like me means everything. So when I think about my full circle moment here, I think about how powerful it is that I'm at Community Coalition and how much it means to me to be in a room full of folks who've paved the way for a lot of folks to be a part of leadership. So thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Aurea, for all that you've done for us.
All right.
Absolutely.
I love that full circle moment. So let's keep rolling with that.
So I guess for me, my purpose is my community, South L.A., black and brown. I came here as a child, immigrant from Mexico, and my neighborhood was majority black, my school was majority black, and like you, I was a beneficiary of affirmative action. So when I started UCLA, same year as you in 1993, I was very clear that it took my entire community to get a handful of us prepared and ready to go to the university. And there were programs at UCLA that actually came to South LA and worked with us at Carver Junior High, at Jefferson High School. And as soon as I stepped on the campus at UCLA, folks like Maula Kaise, working at the community programs office, the retention programs, and Tim Nubeji and Skid Rodriguez, they said, okay, you are here. We need you to take over Barrio Youth Alternative, the program that supported you. And so I said, can I first learn what it means to be a student at UCLA? And they gave me a quarter, my fall quarter. I was able to be a student, work study. Winter quarter, I had to start recruiting students to continue Barrio Youth Alternative at Jefferson High. And it was in 1997 that I also applied for the organizing fellowship, right, on my way to get my MSW at UCLA. And I still remember coming through the doors of Community Coalition, actually parked here, walked in, did a 2-hour interview where the youth interviewed me in a circle of over 30 young high school students, black and brown, Katanja, also Bruin alumni, a little bit after that group, but I remember walking out back to my car and being, I know I got that fellowship. And it was that summer that I got to work with Ryan, Brian, and Damien, in addition to six young people here at Community Coalition. And after that, they could not close the door behind me. I did all my volunteer work for an entire year here when we were organizing on Prop BB. And after that, I was like, okay, in 98, hire me. I want to be here. And I think the community, while Community Coalition has been a vehicle to build the community that South LA residents deserve, South LA is an incredible place that really is shaping not just the city, the state, but impacting what's happening in other places throughout the county. So places, we're doing solidarity work with groups in Detroit, in Jackson, in Chicago. And for me, it's really symbolic of what all communities should be doing, creating a space for everyday residents to get engaged in addressing the root causes, the public and private disinvestment that created the conditions that we saw when Community Coalition was founded.
Thank you. When thinking about what you just shared, a year volunteering and then you got offered a position, can you say a little bit more about that? And part of it for me is like, what is it that did the executive director at that time, Mayor Bass, what did she see in you? Was it, tell us a little bit about that.
So I volunteered for a year. I had done research because LAUSD had passed the first public bond to do repairs to schools throughout the district, and schools in South L.A. had been overlooked. They were going to get security grills. They were not going to get any repairs on their campuses. So our founder, Karen Bass, said, can you work with this group of leaders to do research? And research, not what I was accustomed to at UCLA in the books, but actually going down to the school board, sitting with the young people, sitting for hours to listen to the oversight committee that had closed and made final the allocations for how they were going to spend the money, and studying who was on that commission, on the oversight committee, looking at who had the power to actually make changes. And so when I went back to school and you all continued the campaign, when you actually had a target, I came back to all of the actions. I came back to set up chairs. When the young people were engaging the oversight committee, I drove young people home. And the following summer, when I came back and I said, okay, I'm ready to continue the work and do the work, that was when Mayor Karen Bass said, can you commit to 2 years? And can you commit to, working with us, organizing parents? And I was like, well, I would like to work with the young people. I understand what you want to do. I want to build a youth organization. I understand what you want to do. What we need right now is somebody who can help organize the parents, because while the youth are building out the strategy, those decision makers are going to want to engage voters, and the parents are the voters. And so if you're willing to organize parents, then we can bring you onto the staff to do parent organizing. And so being flexible, that the young people is really where I wanted to be, but where the need was on organizing the parents. And she asked me to make a 2-year commitment, which I did. And this June, that 2-year commitment will be 26 years.
So you heard earlier, Ryan, and so I'll ask this question, and then we can kind of circle back to what any message we want to share with our folks who came out today, this concept of change maker and how we should be spending our lives, how we can contribute. So if you can begin thinking about that. But one of the things that was said earlier, you've certainly brought it up to me before, is, and I think that Aurea's example about what the mayor saw in her, right, was this selfless commitment, like to flexibility, to doing the chairs, but to also having an impact. There's so much that's rooted in that's not about you. Like, it's not about you here. It's not about you in the movement. Can you talk a little bit about how you experienced that, how you think about that? What does that mean for the work? Because in a generation that's looking for the light to be shined on them, how do we navigate shining the light on folks, but also shining a light on where it really needs to be?
Yeah, and I think this is something you remind me about a lot, Alberto, about the work isn't about us. It's about everyday people here in South Central and how we're working with folks. You had said something here about how folks got here, and I think this will help in this response. So I haven't been here for 26 years. I've been here for a year, just celebrated my anniversary, and excited about that. But honestly, given, 26 years, 25 years, 10, 15 years, I'm still a baby when it comes to Community Coalition. But I came here for a couple reasons. One, it was around the time I was finishing actually my dissertation. And I just started, which I just finished last year. I'm remember that it was my anniversary at UCLA.
And it's being published?
And yeah, some of it
Come
is
on.
getting published.
Yes.
But my dad at the time said, you're doing this whole policy wonk dissertation. If you don't do a dissertation really focused on the liberation of Black and brown people, then who's gonna do that? There's enough policy wonk stuff, but what about people? Why don't you just go and listen to people? So I decided to really actually, during the height of the pandemic, change my topic on, well, how is the pandemic impacting Black families here in South Los Angeles? And I had the opportunity to listen to them for 6 months. And it was sobering to hear what was happening during the pandemic, but it was also inspiring to hear how they were getting through. To your point, community folks were getting together, neighbors were getting together with neighbors, people were pooling resources, they were thinking about how they console each other during loss. They were thinking about the things that work well in their communities. They weren't just talking about the deficits that we often talk about South Central, they talked about the strength that comes from South Central. And I thought, well, we don't tell these stories enough. I know a place that tells this story, but we don't do that enough. And unfortunately, I lost my father before I finished my dissertation. But when I was finishing it, there was his voice in my head saying, okay, great, you got a dissertation, you finished something, now how are you gonna spend the rest of your life liberating your people? And I don't think there would be any other place that I could think about doing the work as genuinely and as importantly and as really centered on folks in community than here at Community Coalition, where I could learn in the middle of my career that you can still make a difference in everyday people's lives. So I will say this, I think it is always should be focused on the people. I get to work with the youth, and the youth here in South Central are some of the most brilliant youth in the entire world. And if you hear Jeremiah Wright talk about, hey, I'm South Central strong, and that's a different type of strong. When you hear our youth talk about what needs to change in our community, when you hear the brilliance of our future, but also telling us the things that need to change, I feel blessed to make sure that they can actually lead the next, lead our campaigns in the future, lead our city, be our future mayors. So I do think it's about folks. It's about everyday people, and I'm grateful to do this work, and I've learned a lot over a year, and I've done a lot of policy and education work, but I don't know if I've grown as much in a year as much as I've grown here. So I do want to thank the leadership and the folks who work at Community Coalition for embracing me and allowing me to learn. I'm really appreciative to serve here, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, for the folks, final comments, and we're going to open up some questions. For the folks here who are dying to come work at COCO, but for some reason can't do it, what advice do you give them around being change makers, getting involved, getting engaged?
Before I give the advice, one of the things that really stands out for me in terms of the young people in leadership that we're seeing at Community Coalition, some of the alumni of our youth programs, I mean, seeing Ryan come back as an executive to Community Coalition when he started his organizing as a youth at the age of 15 is one example of what we see more and more, the different generations of leaders that are playing important roles in different sectors, whether it's as educators in the public sector, in elected office, or working for elected officials who are doing governance. Here in the organization, running different departments, I do want to highlight Klaus Diego, who's our Director of Arts and Culture, because our founder always talked about how social movements were most effective in bringing in the masses when you had arts and culture that really shared the stories and the lived experiences of people. And our president and CEO was very supportive of arts and culture when he became CEO in 2015. But it wasn't until we turned arts and culture to the younger people, Klaus Diego, that for those of you who went through the exhibit and saw the phenomenal artists, some of them are alumni of our youth program, all of them are South LA artists that are talking about the most important issue that our city is facing, the housing, the houselessness crisis and the housing affordability crisis. And they created an entire exhibit that can allow for thousands of people from South LA and beyond to come and engage around the context and the experiences of what people are living through art, and to activate that exhibit with gatherings here every Thursday and on the weekend so that we can have conversations about what we have to do that will drive real solutions to poverty-related issues caused by public and private disinvestment in our community. So I do want to say that. But for folks who are interested in being change makers and working at Community Coalition or similar organizations, the best way to get connected is to volunteer and to show up for the community. When I dress up, I am not dressing up for myself to show up looking a certain way. I am dressing up for my community, because that's what our founder, impressed on us. That's what the elders, right now there is a support group that is happening of women who have led some of the most important fights to keep children in their families and out of the private foster care system. These women for decades have been fighting to change the child welfare system for the better of children and families who were impacted by mass incarceration and the drug on wars. And so when I walk through the door, I'm walking up dressed up for the women. I'm walking up dressed up for the children that they're bringing into the space. And so if you want to work for an organization that is organizing and bringing in communities, Black and brown folks, young and older residents, show up and show up for them, move a chair, offer water, bring things to them. They will notice you. They will be the ones to go to the leadership and say, this person keeps coming back. Is there a role in the organization? Because they have been giving of their time, and they see me, they value us, they understand what we're about. For me, that is the best way to authentically connect to an organization that you're interested in. It might take a year. It might take 2 years. Some folks have come to Community Coalition for 3 years. Show up if you are really interested, and connect in real ways to the people who are there. And I don't just mean the staff, but the community.
You want to add anything to any advice to the folks watching in on getting involved? You want to add to what I put on there?
Yeah, maybe I'll double down on something that you said, because I feel like I've experienced this. If you are interested and committed to this work and to social change, and you don't feel like it's happening where you're at right now, absolutely look for it in another place. Absolutely find a sacred ground place like Community Coalition. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we don't have much time. If the pandemic's taught me anything, it's that all the folks that, when we plan out our journeys, when we're writing out we don't have as much time as we think we have, and our community really matters, and there's nothing more important than serving the community. And I think you can do that, yes, in your spare time, but you can do that full time here at a place like Community Coalition. Right. And I will say this, because Alberto and Array remind me every day, can you give a round of applause for the community organizers at Community Coalition, across the city, across the country? Dr. Bob Ross says there is no more important job in the country than that of a community organizer. And we've been through a number of years. We realize building power is the most important thing for change. So I will shout out the launch of our National Center for Community Organizing, which is just down the street. And we're going to take you all in a van right after this. I know you're like, well, we will at some point. Because they're training thousands of organizers and continue training folks who will continue to build power. But guess what? If you're interested in LA, Community Coalition's doors are always open, and we'll see you at the next event. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Give it up to Dr. Smith and Aurea Montes Rodriguez. As we get a mic out for a question, earlier this week we had a panel that Dr. Smith and his team and the organizers all pulled together. There were two women on the team, one who used to work at Community Coalition and another who was a youth member at Community Coalition. And we were having a conversation before coming out about, I don't know if you were able to hear this part, but about imposter syndrome. And one of the women is in charge of implementing the ULA, which is hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to go build housing for the homeless, for the unhoused, for the housing insecure, and just talking about, and then I asked Catherine, who was a former youth, who's an architect, if she's ever dealt with imposter syndrome. She's like, absolutely, I have. And I asked her, well, what have you done to help us sort of problem solve? She said, you know what I did? She said, I went to volunteer. I went to volunteer at LA Can 3 days a week. I set up chairs, I set up tables, I served food, I listened to the unhoused, and within 2 months, I realized that this imposter syndrome isn't what's important. What other people think isn't really important. What matters is the community I built of the unhoused folks that I was with. And that gave her the medicine she needed to go every day and confront what it's like to work in a sector of people that don't look like her or aren't from her community. So I just want to double down on the volunteerism, double down on the everyday people, and with that, open it up for some questions.
Anybody?
Let me see.
It is working. Yeah. Anybody
Well, let's
have a
hold
question?
on you. Let's or reflection. I would love to hear a reflection. You don't have to ask a question, but something that that impacted you tonight.
There's a lot of impact, but I do have a question.
Yeah.
And that is, given the work, one of the things that we talked about last year was emotional labor. So I'm just curious, given the work that you do, how do you refuel?
You want me? So emotional labor is real, especially when you are building people power and developing leaders, and hearing the stories and the experiences that they're having because of poverty and racism. And so I refuel, and I have to do it regularly by getting in my car with my children and just going for a walk in nature, the beach, and just disconnecting and and just allowing myself the time to feel small in our large universe and grounded by water. That is a ritual for me on Sunday mornings when I wake up, and on Saturday when the kids go to sleep, including the 18-year-old, will say, are we going to the beach tomorrow morning? And I am a yogi, so I practice yoga, and the longest that I will stay off my mat is a couple of weeks. And after a couple of weeks of staying off the mat, when I find myself off-centered in spaces, I remind myself that I am centered when I go back on my mat. And also here at Community Coalition, we brought a Zen Buddhist, Roshi, who was leading a study process focused on the art of war. And she is a leader who has been fighting for the sovereignty of the Native Hawaiians in Hawaii. The practice for the group, and I know Ernesto's here, there's a number of folks at Community Coalition that have participated. It's practicing Tai Chi in community in Sangha, and so that's another practice that I turn to when I'm in spaces with comrades and colleagues. So really understanding that if I don't put my mask, as they tell us when we're on an airplane first, and I don't take care of myself, I cannot be fully present and engaged for my colleagues and for the community that I serve.
Sometimes at about 1 a.m, I go into my pantry and eat a bunch of Doritos and realize that was not the right choice to refuel.
Speak about it.
I do that, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes we make choices that we think are about refueling and they're really not. But I'm compassionate with myself and tell myself when I do this again tomorrow night, it's gonna be all right. But I think for me, the two things I would say is I'm 47, so I'm good. I'm in a good place, but I'm also at a place where I realize that I have to be very intentional about who my friends are. Life is short, and you only have so much time. And at some point, I have a lot of people I care about, but I have a handful of friends. And those friends are the folks that you can really lean on and make time for. And it's those folks that I go to refuel at the end of the day that will remind me when I'm questioning choices or considering something foolish of why I do what I do, and who are willing to pour love into you. Those friends come in the form of siblings. I don't have any siblings in my family, unfortunately, that I can rely on. They come in the form of siblings, and they come in the form of, some of them are friends from my time at UCLA. And some of them, many of them, are friends of people I made here at Community Coalition. So that's my constant source. I play baseball on Sundays. That's not where I refuel, honestly. That's where I breathe. But the refueling happens with my relationships with my friends, and I just encourage you all to find those folks and lean on them and be there for them when they need you as well.
I have a hard time with this question. I was really thinking about it, but there's a couple things. One, we just celebrated Mother's Day, and I will just say this. There are a group of women in my life who've held me down, who still answer my calls. So I'm gonna take this chance to just shout out, Aunt Carol, thank you so much for all that you do. That's still taking my phone call, still answering, still listening, still guiding me. I appreciate all that you've done for my journey, and it's folks like my Aunt Carol, my mom, my grandmothers who've held me down. And I do want to shout out particularly women of color when we talk about emotional labor. I think we do not talk enough about how our women hold down communities. So thank you, Aunt Carol. Send her some positive love. She just got a challenging diagnosis, but we're sending positive energy her way. The other thing I'll say is that I had a chance to volunteer in Cuernavaca and Mexico City, and I'd like to go back there. Not only because they're beautiful, amazing cities, but because I get to check on my students that I had an opportunity to engage and see how they're growing. So I love to go back. I tell folks, my students call me chocolatote grandote, giant chocolate, to this day. And I wear that with a badge of pride, so y'all can laugh all you want, but I'm joking. Once again, I think it's a full circle moment. I came up as a youth, and I continue to engage with youth who've come across my career. So,
one last thing on this, and please be prepared to one more maybe comment or question. I'm a parent, and I have two kids. I have a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old, and we all, like I said in the beginning, have our different journeys. So, I could have started and said, where I refuel is my kids in my family, right? Like, and there's truth to that, absolutely. There's moments where like, but for those of you who are parents also, that's also not where I love my kids. Jesus, don't hear me different. I love them. And there's moments where I feel great energy, but that is also not where I get refueled. It's just not. It's so much of my energy is being poured to raising my kids. So much of my energy is being poured into my marriage. So much energy is being poured into the movement that all of those need to be refueled. And so if you're a parent, to not feel guilty if you have these thoughts. I know I was talking to one of our board members, like, you need to be so much. I was like, I love my kids, you know, like, but I also see what parents are going through, and it's not easy. So, yes, refuel with your children, but also be compassionate with yourself and acknowledge that sometimes the refueling isn't going to come from the movement. It's not going to come from your children. It's not going to come from, you know, eating Doritos at night. It's got to come from somewhere else, and for me, it's my friends.
I appreciate you saying that because I would say out of 45 staff, we have now a good, maybe half are parents with children from different ages, which means that Community Coalition is really a family-friendly organization. One of our former staff actually sent me a photo, and there were 3 little girls at the event on Saturday. One was Carlo, your daughter. The second was Avery, who is Glauce's daughter. And then Lucy says, Bella? Ella. I knew I was close. Ella. And we always talk about the Cocoa babies. My children were born during my time working here at Community Coalition. And that meant a lot of sleepless nights, coming in with wrinkled clothes at times or disheveled, and issues that come up in families with children, including having to step away to support them in school, and or because they weren't feeling well at multiple times. For me, with 3 children, now my children are almost 20, 18, and 13, and so it also goes by fast. But I think that the more important part is that while it is difficult, is it's being in a work environment that really values families, and that understands that in order for you to show up in your best self to work, your family has to be okay, your children have to be okay, and that means that you have to spend time with mom and aunt and family members. I think that is something that all alumni have to navigate in one way or another, but I think looking for places that also understand and support the importance of different family structures and balances is something that we should all pay more attention to and be sensitive to. And I'm really proud when I can say that there's such a large number of parents in the organization, and the organization is so intergenerational in terms of age groups of folks who work here, with a good group of alumni from UCLA that folks like Mandla brought over starting in the 90s.
Yes, please.
We have a comment. Can I? You
Yes,
wanted to
bring it, please.
Yeah. So we appreciate Cynthia. Cynthia wrote in the Zoom chat, "We are the ones we have been waiting for. You all are amazing and an incredible inspiration to us all. Thank you for your commitment and doing the work to uplift us all."
Wonderful. Thank you. Any other final comments or questions? Going once. Twice. All right, any final thoughts from you all? It's okay if not. Yes.
There was one thing, Alberto, that that you lifted up in terms of building power, but that for us, we've been spending a lot of time organizationally talking about in terms of what it means to be a change maker at this time. And for me, it's the multiracial solidarity and really living into that. And I want to lift it up as a brown person in the organization, in a Black-Brown organization that, after you spoke about the murder of George Floyd, the movement for Black Lives that, had been doing organizing work and doing the education around the killing of Black men and boys. And we have been spending a lot of time at Community Coalition talking about the work that we need to do moving forward. And we assertively or definitively say that multiracial solidarity is the way forward. And I had actually brought a quote that I wanted to share, and it's a little bit of a passage. So I want to share it because when in a Black-Brown organization, there are things that are going to come up that will put to question, was this anti-Black sentiment, right? Or anti-Brown sentiment. And when I'm trying to figure things out for myself and my role in the process, there is Audre Lorde, and she gave a keynote in 1981, The Uses of Anger, Women Responding to Racism. And she said, anger is loaded with information and energy. When I speak of women of color, I do not only mean Black women. The woman of color who is not Black and who charges me with rendering her invisible by assuming that her struggles with racism are identical with my own has something to tell that I had better learn from, lest we both waste ourselves fighting the truths between us. If I participate knowingly or otherwise in my sister's oppression, and she calls me on it, to answer her anger with my own only blankets the substance of our exchange with reaction. It wastes energy. And yes, it's very difficult to stand still and to listen to another woman's voice delineate an agony I do not share, or one to which I myself have contributed. And I wanted to share this quote because as the women from Kinship in Action who led the Family Care campaign have been working for decades to build up and sustain this community, there is a role that we all get to play in moving our country forward. And if you want to be a change maker, regardless of your ethnicity, your sexuality, your religious preference, your political party, we can all play a role in asserting that multiracial solidarity is the only way forward, and that we can play a role by pausing, being still, and listening to another person to understand their experience and what it is that they are going through without having to bring in our own experience for it to allow us to have a meaningful conversation about how we move forward.
Thank you. Okay.
I just have one thing to say. That, well, first of all, thank you, and thank you for being so just inspiring and welcoming us here as a UCLA alum and dear friend of many people here. I hope to see more of this by our beloved university and just connecting many different people. And I'd like to just highlight just ways that we can support COCO. If you want to touch on some of those. I know you talked about volunteering, but something that I did last year was I became a member. I joined that way. So, and I don't know if people know that there's other ways or avenues to support COCO. So maybe you want to just touch on some of those so we could gain some support tonight even.
Sure, yes, you can absolutely become a member and you can donate. So you can go to cocosouthla.org and there's a donate button. You can click on that and you can donate monthly, as little as you want or as most as you want. So you're, constantly doing a monthly donation. You can do it annually. These dollars obviously help the organization do the work that it does, and that's really important. And so to the extent to which you can do that, that would be absolutely wonderful. And then you can always come, if you join our mailing list, you can always come to all of our art events, or we always emailing folks about the different activities we got going on. I think we have our final, next Saturday, there's a big festival we're doing here to close out the exhibit. So we welcome you back here on 81st in Vermont on May 20th, starting at 12 o'clock, so you can come through. And again, yes, volunteer, and that's one of the biggest, certainly, ways. And if it's not here, there's an organization, I'm sure, in your zip code or near you where you can get involved and get engaged. So with that, thank you all so much for coming tonight. Let's hang out, let's have some food. If you haven't checked out the exhibit, please check it out. And thank you so much, Aurea, Ryan, and all of you. Appreciate you.